Hello and welcome back to our Passion for Moms webinar series, Motherhood Leaders Who Are Defining the Future. In this series, we've been highlighting a variety of moms using their platform to glorify God as they are raising up world changers. And today I am honored to have the privilege to have Arlene Pellicane from California join me today. And we are just going to learn more about her story and how she has had the opportunity as an author and speaker to spread the gospel and how she's been able to navigate that in as a mother and as a wife in the platform that God has given her. So Arlene, welcome.
So fun to be with you and the moms.
Well, thank you for joining us. Arlene, why don't you just begin by telling the audience a little bit about who you are, how many kids you have, and just anything you want to share with us so that we can get to know you.
Yeah, my name is Arlene Pellicane, and my husband James and I have been married for 21 years. There was a comic in the Wall Street Journal this morning that was like, it was like a job interview, and the question was, are you good at conflict resolution? And then the answer was, I've been married for 20 years. So obviously the answer is right. So we were joking about that with my kids, and they're getting so big. I have my firstborn is almost 16. He is almost going to turn 16. And then I have almost 14-year-old and an almost 11-year-old. So we are 6th grade, 9th grade, and 11th grade, boy, girl, girl. And so I've always wanted, I was the young woman growing up who always wanted to be a wife. And then it's like, it took so long to find my husband. So, we got married in our late 20s, which now sounds so utterly normal and maybe even early. But when the 1990s, that felt like, man, when am I ever going to find this person? And then I wanted to have children, and we were not able to have children right away. And so that infertility was not something that I ever expected to walk through. And then after I had surgery, then we were able to have our firstborn that I'm telling you is about 16. So that was so miraculous. So I've always, always, always wanted, I wanted to be a wife and I wanted to be a mom. And when we held that first baby and were able to have that first baby, it really was very, very miraculous to us. And my husband remembers being in the hospital room, and he was looking down, and it's on a freeway, and he sees all these cars passing. He says, can you imagine? None of those people on the freeway know that our son has been born. Like, isn't it so funny that as you're going about your daily business, someone is having like the moment of the lifetime kind of idea. But we've tried to keep that wonder about being a parent and about being a spouse. And both of those things are challenging to trying to keep that as a wonder. So my books do help me because I write about parenting and about being happy. And, when you find wisdom, the Proverbs tells us it makes you happy, so this isn't just like a flighty, like, hey, let's buy something and feel happy. But, how can we learn more about being an intentional mom? And I know that's exactly who your audience is and who's listening right now, is that, when you are intentional and you realize you're raising a world changer, and you realize you look at the freeway and say, don't you know who's I'm raising in my house? That brings a lot of excitement and purpose to what you're doing. And hopefully a moment like this will remind you of that today.
Oh, that is so good. And I feel very much a kindred spirit to you when you talk about your passion and enthusiasm. I was the same way. All I wanted to do was to be married and to have kids and to be able to live this dream of being a mom is definitely the greatest and most fulfilling blessing that I have ever experienced in my life. So I love your passion for being a mom as well. You said you're in California. What has that, times have definitely been changing rapidly with everything shutting down, and then just now back as we're trying to transition back to school. Has that been challenging for your family, and as a mom with especially the ages of your kids in that middle school, high school range? Has that been something that has been a growing opportunity, challenging? What has that looked like?
I think overall, we've been okay and fine, because obviously there's so much to be grateful for. We are at home, we are comfortable, no one is sick, So, all those things that there's a lot to be grateful for. And it's just getting used to adapting, and I think in that way, that's a good skill for us as adults and for the kids to learn that, okay, we have to adapt. Like there are some things in life you cannot change. Like no matter what you do. For us, where I live in San Diego, your school is not open. Like you can stand there all you want, but you're not getting into the classroom. So you just have to adapt that, okay, I guess I need to buy a pair of earbuds and sit in front of this computer and do my schooling online. And so that has definitely the thing to be the gain there is learning how to be flexible.
Mhm.
And then the hard thing, I think, is all those disappointments. I think it's
Sure.
hardest on my sixth grader here where we are. That's the end of elementary school for her. So
Mhm.
she's been at the same school from kindergarten to sixth grade. So that's the most difficult because in that sense, like you want to go to school. Like sometimes
Right.
the high schoolers are like, oh, good, now I don't have to wake up. In the normal school day, they'd be up at 6:15,
Right.
getting
Right.
ready to bike into school and be sitting at their desk at 7:30. And now school doesn't start online until 9 a.m. So it's kind of like, hey man, this is like easy street. It's like easy street. So I feel like for the high schoolers, it's more of the social aspect, of course, that they
Right.
miss. The joke was it's all online from 9 o'clock to 2:30, with breaks in between classes and then a lunch break. But it'd be things like, oh mom, I sneezed online and my friend put in the chat, bless you. And he was like, that was the most social thing that happened all day, which I thought was such a funny story because it's so different, obviously, than meeting a new person in your class
Right.
and walking to your next class with this person and meeting your friend for lunch. So those are losses that I think are really detrimental for all kids, so that I think has been really hard.
Well, and it's interesting how there are so many losses that we should grieve.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just the life skills that our kids and that we can adapt to of recognizing
Yes.
that God's sovereign and he sits on the throne. None of this has caught him off guard. And yeah, being flexible and learning to adapt to new normals,
Yeah.
I think are some really good life skills that we all have the opportunity to hopefully embrace well, but also navigate how to see what God wants to teach us in new formats of how we do life and whatever that looks like, new platforms
Yes.
as well.
Yeah,
So
there was Dr. David Jeremiah has this new book. I feel like if this title isn't right, just look for Dr. Jeremiah's book, but I'm pretty sure it's Shelter in God. But it was talking at the beginning, and I won't quote it as beautifully, but just of all the times like David was sheltered when in the cave when Saul was after him, and Jonah was sheltered in that fish for 3 days, and Naomi was sheltered away from home and felt abandoned until Ruth came into her life and all that. So it just had all these biblical characters. Paul, 3 years in the desert of Arabia. And then after that sheltering, what happened? Like they emerged with these great messages. And so that's really been, I think that's really a great thing to ask God about. Like, God, while we are sheltering as a family, how can we emerge as a better mom, as a better parent, as a better world changer, as our kids learning new things? Like, what can we do to emerge stronger, closer to God, and maybe with that passionate message that the world needs to hear?
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And just being creative in how he's wanting to use this. And one of the things that I love is that with every loss, like nothing is wasted with God.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that even though there's loss and there's pain, that this isn't going to be wasted. And we want to be intentional to see how God wants to use us and use us for his glory in this time. Well, Arlene, one of the things that I would love to just learn from you, and I know our audience would be interested in, is you are an author and a speaker. And I think that there's many moms who have, maybe a desire to learn, and they are ferocious readers. We all have attended conferences because we want to increase our knowledge and be a better wife, a better mom. But then there's also those of us who are inspired to use the creative abilities that God has given us to write or to express the things that we've learned, and we want to share those with the platform that God gives us. Can you tell me a little bit about what your journey has looked like? How maybe you got into writing and speaking from the very beginning? Because I know as an author myself, it can be a hard journey. It can be a long journey, and even just having an audience that wants to listen can be a challenge.
Yes, right.
So what has that looked like for you?
Yeah, my first book came out in 2010. And then here we are in 2020, and I'm on book 8 and 9. So it's been a
Wow.
very busy journey, but
Congratulations.
thank you. I've learned so much. I used to think like, oh, all I have to do is write the words and the people will come. And then you realize, oh, you write the words and your mom and your friend come, and that's all. So that was the biggest shock to me, was having that first book come out and realize, oh my word, it's the writing is the easy part.
Yes.
And marketing is the hard part. And it's like authors, they don't sign up to be marketers. Those are the business majors and the marketing majors. So that, I think, is a lovely, realistic realization to have kind of early in the journey. But I had not grown up wanting to write. Like, I wasn't the girl that was like, oh, when I write my first book. I never thought that. But when I was in junior high, I gave a speech and I really liked it. And so ever since then, and of course I had people
Wow.
in my life, like my senior pastor, who would say, I heard your speech and you have a gift of God to speak. And then I'd have adults, in my life growing up as a high schooler, come and affirm that to say, like, you have an ability. So that, I think, is so important.
Wow.
When you see someone with an ability, to nurture that ability, whatever that ability is, because your voice could really be a blessing, obviously in your own children's life, but in someone else's child's life too. And so basically I really liked speaking, but I knew, like, how do you graduate from college and just start talking? Like, what in the world do you talk about? So I was a communication major. I was with a interdisciplinary with intercultural studies, thinking that maybe I'll be a missionary, because I really just wanted to say, God, use me. But I hated linguistics, and I didn't want to be a nurse, and I didn't want to be a teacher. So I ended up being an admissions counselor for international students. So that was kind of cool. That was my first
Oh,
job after
wow.
college. And
Okay.
now it was at Biola University. And
Yeah.
now looking back at that experience, I can see, I learned interviewing skills during that time, because I'd interview incoming students, and public relations skills, things like that. So just know that wherever you are in your journey, the things you've done, they will point you
Right.
towards that next thing that God wants you to do. God actually does prepare you through that way. So I had the dream, like, I want to be Kathy Lee Gifford. I want to talk on a morning talk show, and I want to interview people. So I went to get my master's in journalism at Regent University
Okay.
in Virginia Beach. And that's where I met my husband. And my first job was at the 700 Club, which was a dream job for me. I was working as their features producer and, doing stories about people whose lives have been changed by God. So it was very exciting. But then I got married, and my husband's job moved him to Dallas. And so I left. So I had 6 months of bliss of doing my quote unquote dream job. But isn't it so lovely? That was not a hard decision. I knew I wanted to be married to my husband, James. That was not that hard. And look at God, let me do all the things I've always wanted to do in a different way. And ended up moving to San Diego and settling, because my parents are here. And I worked for Dr. David Jeremiah, working on their television program, on their radio show, writing promos, writing devotions, etc. So all of those things were really great primers for writing books, writing ads for my books, all those kinds of things. And basically, when I had my child 16 years ago, we had always talked about that I'd like to be a stay-home mom. We had planned that way, like kind of squirreling away my income. And so we were like, let's do it. So when I was home, I was freelancing for Dr. David Jeremiah and writing for them. But my husband, James, said to me, you say you'd like to become a speaker someday. And a lot of times speakers, write books. And so he's like, and now you're kind of accustomed to writing. Why don't you quit your freelance job with David Jeremiah? And why don't you try writing and speaking on your own? So that was really, I can really
Wow.
thank my husband for that pivot point of, because you want the income, you want this like little side business, And so that was the thing. And we attended a conference together, a mastermind conference together every year, and done it maybe 18 years in a row. And so every year you're making this goal. So my goal was, I will come back to this conference 1 year later with a manuscript. And then, I didn't know, like, what should it be? But at that time, I was in my 30s, and I was pregnant, then not pregnant, then miscarriage, then pregnant, then miscarriage, and pregnant, etc. So I wrote a book called Losing Weight After Baby. And it was more of a motivational book because I'm not a health or dietitian or anything like that. It was just more like a motivating book. So that's how it all got started. And then I stood in line and I watched a speaker that I admired, Pam Farrell, and I stood in line to talk to her. She'd been authored more than 40 books. And I stood in line and I was so nervous and my heart was pounding out of my chest. And I just wanted to tell her, like, I admire what you do. And can you help me and show me, how do you do this, what you do? So that's another tip, is whatever that woman is doing, maybe she's got her own baking business, maybe she makes stationery, maybe she's like an amazing homeschool teacher, like whoever she is, you can approach this person and ask them, like, hey, can I take you to coffee? Can I pick your brain? And to my surprise, she was like, oh, I mentor girls like you, and let's have breakfast. And she's the one who really looked at that first manuscript that I made, that Losing Weight After Baby manuscript, brought it to her publisher. Her publisher liked it enough to say, you know what, the baby market is a little too narrow. So you also, as a writer, have to be willing to let go of your ideas. Could you write a broader, like, book for women? And that's where my first book, 31 Days to a Younger You, was born. And so that's kind of how it all started, was through that. And the advice I would give, if I had a very good friend, and we were at a retreat, women's retreat, and you're supposed to talk about your hopes and your dreams. And it was just her and I. And I said, you know what? I dream someday of like speaking and writing books and being on Focus on the Family. That's my dream. And she was so sweet. She just listened to me. Well, years later, she told me, Arlene, when you told me that dream, I thought you were crazy. This is like her best friend, right? She's just like, because obviously that sounds so crazy and so out of reach, like crazy, right? And yet here we are years later, and I have been on Focus on the Family. And I don't say that to be like, ooh, well, no, I say that to, like, you might have this outrageous, really weird thought in your mind, and you're not married to it. Like if it never happens, you're not going to be like, oh, I can't believe I was never on Focus on the Family. Like, no, you leave those results to however God wants to work that out. Right. But I think it's okay to dream big and to be like, hey, maybe we'll do this, because you'll be a better person, better mom, better person for aiming towards that really weird high goal. And even if you don't get there, you still would have accomplished a lot. So one of the key concepts is I never tried to start something that I couldn't do consistently. So in other words, when I started blogging, it wasn't like, oh, let me blog 3 times a week. I would have burnt out. You have little kids, you have all these things happening. So I just told myself, I will blog once a week. I will podcast once a month. And that was it. And then I consistently did that. Like, you never then miss, like, once you do it, you're kind of in. Right. You can't have that wiggle room of like, oh, I'm tired. No, you just have to be like, okay, I podcast once a month. Right. And I blog once a week. And so whatever that rhythm is, I learned this, whatever it is in what you're kind of dreaming about doing on the side as a mom, you start doing that. And then once that's really established, then you go, okay, now I'm going to add, I'll start writing devotions for these people once a month. And then you start adding these things, but you really can't add what you cannot keep. And if you know, like, I cannot keep this consistently and keep my family sane. And believe me, this is a struggle. So don't think I have this all together. There are times where it's like, okay, I need to say no to this. And I always give plenty of time. Like, I will write for you for another 6 months, and then I'm going to need to bow out, things like that, So just have that compound effect of be faithful always in what you're given. And then the more will come.
Well, and I think you bring up so many really important points that, God does give us dreams and desires in our heart. Yeah. And I love that we have the opportunity to be a mom, to be intentional in our families, and to not have to sacrifice being intentional, but to also realize that, like, as you said, whether you're an author or speaker or, bake or create stationery, whatever it is, we have outlets that we can use the gifts and abilities that God gives us. So we don't have to, it's not an all or nothing. We have the opportunity to embrace who God has made us to be while still being intentional in our homes. But I think also, as you pointed out, we do have to create boundaries and saying no is a blessing and a gift to be able to have those boundaries, to know for the times and seasons that we're in, especially with our kids.
Yeah, there was a time where a publisher asked me to do a book, and as an author, right, you take it, just like someone saying, I want to order 50 of those things, like you take the order. But
Yes.
my husband, who obviously is a fan because he's the one who started me on this journey, my husband was like, not a good time for you to do a book. Like, you just did a book. And he knows that when I get into that book writing mode, it's like, okay, we're going to lose mommy for 3 months, like she's not going to be as available to us, etc. And so he said, no, this is not a good time. And that was hard for me to tell the publisher, no, this is not a good time. But, God bless that. And then that did come about at a different time.
Right.
So a part of this too is like saying no sometimes and letting things go. And I think there's those big rhythms, like big projects. So for instance, one thing, like let's say you have to travel for your work.
Mm-hmm.
Then for me, what I always envisioned was, okay, I don't want to travel more than 8 to 10 weekends a year.
Mm-hmm.
Because that means that, I'm home most of, that means I'm home 42 weekends a year. So I'm like, that's
Right.
okay. Because I didn't want to be like the happy home writer speaker that their kids grow up someday in an expose and they're like, oh yeah, my mom was really happy because she was gone 30 weekends.
Never around.
She was never here. So that was a really good rule. So, and
Right.
and so that way, if I got too many speaking engagements, then I would know, oh, my limit is set for this month. But can you imagine in all of these years of setting that goal, that's what it always turned out to be? Like God was like trying to make it easy for me. Like it was always that amount of speaking. So I just feel like if you will make those priorities and like these are our rules and you stick with them, God will have you flourish under those rules.
Right.
And then you always have to adapt and adjust. Like my husband just this last week said to me, sometimes you're on the computer at night too much. Like, I think we should get back in the habit of after dinner, like turning off the computer so that you're not tempted to finish up an email or you're tempted to.
Right.
So these are
Right.
continuing, ongoing conversations for all of us.
Well, and I love also how you bring into the conversation your husband and that respect and that appreciation for his care and concern that he's showing for you and to your family. Because I think that's another thing, is that when we have unity in our marriages and can create those boundaries, we're protecting our marriages, we're protecting our families, and we're putting up those safeguards, because it can be easy to say yes to everything that's thrown at us.
Yeah.
But if we're not guarding and protecting our families and our homes, then that can have a dangerous outcome as well, because then we're losing sight of why we're even writing the books, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so I think having a husband on board that is helping you protect your time is critical and such a blessing. What would you say, for the moms who are just wanting to maybe explore new avenues for, and we'll focus on you as a author and speaker. Obviously, this can apply to whatever interest that women have. But how did you first take those steps of when you were using your gifts and abilities in the workplace, transitioning to starting something on your own? I think those can be very sensitive times. And I know for me that it's kind of like once I put everything in, whether it's a book or planning a conference, immediately afterwards, Satan attacks and you feel, all those feelings of failure or feelings of you only can hear the negative, right? Mm-hmm. How have you been able to navigate launching on your own, being disciplined to make it happen, but also fight the either criticism or the self-worth that you're not getting your identity through this, but you're using your identity to share a story? What does that look like for you?
Yes. So I think that, when you put your material out there, whatever it is, and then for some of us, we are wired to want that positive feedback. That's me. Like I want positive feedback. And if I get negative feedback, I think, oh no, like they didn't like it. Whereas I know others would be like, that doesn't really bother me that much. You know, you're wired that way. Like I put the good information out there, and if you want to take it, you take it. And if you don't want to take it, don't take it. So just kind of recognize where you are on that spectrum. And don't worry if you see your friend and you think, why is she not bothered by that? But I'm so bothered by it. Then, you know, that's how you're wired. It's okay. So one thing that was really helpful, sometimes I would have like a negative comment, like kind of a mean comment, you know, like, well, that you understand how people are on social media and on a YouTube video or whatever. And my husband really helped me. And he said, do you know that person? I was like, no. He's like, well, what do the people you know say about your work? And then I'm like, oh, they say it's good. Like they think it's worthwhile. I said, well, then listen to those people. So that little pivot, I think, is so helpful when you hear a criticism or you feel like you have that negative feedback, is just that question, do you know that person? And maybe you do. And if so, then, you know, what is that person like? Is this person, is it usually the wounds of a faithful friend, or is it more like this, you know, kind of a mean-spirited person that has something negative to say about everyone? So kind of filter it through that and have your inner circle of girlfriends or family members, parents, sisters, whatever, that you can go back to say when you're doubting yourself. Can you see, you know, is what I'm saying biblical? Is what I'm saying worthwhile? Is there something mean-spirited in what I'm saying? Do I need to adapt? And I think if we're open to the criticism of our friends and those who care about us and that are wise, I mean, the Bible has all sorts of wonderful things to say about how you're supposed to be open to wise criticism, and you're foolish if you don't listen. But then when you have this either silence from no one's responding to you on whatever project you're doing, or negative, that you also have the wisdom to say, I guess that's okay. Like, I will listen to the people who care about me. And then for a while, like, as you're asking about starting out, for a long time, I think in whatever profession you're doing, as you're starting, you're kind of in secret because no one's really looking at your work. Because, you know, like, let's say you're beginning as a photographer and you have your first job, you know, tons and tons of people aren't looking at your first pictures. And that's how it's supposed to be, because your first pictures are probably not as good as, you know, your 100th wedding. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to get better at it. So I think there is something that we do embrace, those small beginnings, and that at the beginning you're doing work that nobody sees, but that's very valuable because you're learning. So when I first started speaking, of course, it's free. You know, it's me learning. I did a lot of speaking, like in nursing homes. I go and do Bible studies and kind of polish up my skills. You know what I mean? So at first you're doing that. And I wrote articles, free articles for any site that would take them. And who knows, maybe just one person read it. But it's the point of you trying to learn your craft. So don't despise that. And then it's a tricky thing because in some ways you do want to look at numbers and growth, that they'll tell you a story. But in other ways, you know, sometimes you don't have great numbers, and that's okay, because you're still doing the work. And you still have that belief that God's big enough to connect your work to whoever needs your work. Like, he can figure that out, even if you don't have 1 million Instagram followers, you know, like, he can figure this out.
That's so true. And I think it's really important for us to recognize. I know that's something that I've had to remind myself and struggle with, is just, you know, God's the one who gives us the platform. And we live in such a comparison world. You know, social media is fantastic, but it also can just be soul sucking if we are trying to get our identity through that and looking at numbers and looking at comparison. So I think
I want to add something about that. One thing you can do for any profession is when you look at that person who's doing it better than you. So they've done it longer, their sales are greater, their whatever. Instead of looking at it like, oh, look at them, they're so successful, you know, instead, like, have that idea, like, well, what's one thing or two things or whatever that I can learn. How does she post, or what does she post, or what does she sell? How does she talk about what she's selling? And then start learning from that person. And then instead of feeling this animosity towards this person, it's like you've kind of put yourself in mentorship, because there's nothing wrong with looking at a success. For me, it'd be like looking at a successful author. Like for me, looking at a Lisa Turkerist, and for me to wonder, like, how does Lisa connect with those huge audiences? And what does she share about herself? And how does she do that? How does she, and those are good questions. Like, how can I learn from her to be a better speaker? Like, she's such an amazing speaker. She's so good at Bible study. Like, how can I learn from her? And I think when you put yourself in that position, then all of that comparison yuckiness is gone. And instead you're just appreciative that, wow, I have this person that I watched this and I got this like little tip from what I watched. So just shift that comparison and it could turn out to be a big blessing to you.
I love that. And I think that mental shift in how we view social media, because I do think it's a real struggle when you're scrolling through and you're focused on the comparison and the numbers and the success versus what can I learn from them. What did you find? Because there's a couple things I want to dive into, and especially with your new book coming out, but what would you say helped you to be faithful in those early years when you said, about the quiet season of not giving up? Because I think that it's easy for us to look at Elisa and see something, again, whatever industry and profession and platform that God gives us, we want to be on the center stage. We want to have already reached the pinnacle of success. We already want to have the accolades of the following. How have you seen God teach you from that first book to numerous books later, 10 years later, to be faithful, to not give up, to be okay with a slow immersion of notoriety, as opposed to just feeling frustrated of nobody cares, nobody wants to read.
Yes, yeah. I think it's like maintenance and then goal setting. So it's the maintenance of, no matter what response I get, like, these activities will happen. These devotions will get written. These podcasts will go out. I think I've been podcasting without stop since 2007. So here we are in 2020, but it's been once a month. So just recently.
But you were on the early end of podcasting.
Or very early end. So once a month, but now I just go twice a month. And we've talked about going weekly, but I have such a backlog of podcasts that we felt like it's okay. We can keep going twice a month, because if you're just catching up on the Happy Home podcast, there are hundreds of podcasts in the back that you can look at. So maintenance. So no matter what happens, like, this is a decision I've made. And obviously there are times maybe that you say, okay, I guess this season has ended. So I'm not saying that you can't end. You can. Right. But if you still have the interest, I still had the interest to write and to speak, then it's like, that's a non-negotiable. Like, we will continue maintaining that regardless of if we get a response or not, because that's a good activity. And then you try, for me, it's like the carrot, and how the carrot's used in so many ways. For me, it was that podcast, because what I would do is I'd interview someone, like a Tim Hawkins, for instance. That was a big one that I got to interview Tim Hawkins, and then I'd put his quotes in my books. And they knew going in, obviously, that I'm going to interview you for my book. We're going to record it. We're going to turn it into the podcast. Is that all right? So I'd have all these different uses for things. And that helped me maximize my time as a mom. So as you're thinking about something, that same material, think of, how could this be used in different ways? So maybe it's in photography and you realize, oh, I can use this at churches for their media needs. Like, churches have websites. So realizing, oh, I could take the same picture and I could offer it to the church for their website. And I could also use it for my website to show what I can do, whatever the case. All I'm saying is take what you do and just try to think of, what are other uses for this thing? And then it's maintenance, and then it's goal setting, just like always having your eyes forward, your eyes thinking, what's that next thing that I want to do? And I think really attending conferences is a huge part of this, because I would attend a yearly conference that was like that mastermind that is goal setting. That is, you're listening to a Scott Hamilton, to a Jim Rohn, to a Zig Ziglar, back in the day, and you're listening and you're realizing like, okay, like there is more. So you need, I think, that conference experience, whether obviously in person is best, but or virtually, it can also happen that way, that you have that nudge to say, what's the next step? So I think that maintenance, and then always keeping that growth, like Caleb in the Bible, he's old and he's just like, give me one more mountain, you know, like that's so cool. So just for your posture to be like, okay, God, we're here. What's going to happen next? And I think you'll find that very rejuvenating, because then it keeps you from the doldrums and it keeps you just from feeling stuck.
Yeah. What have you learned as a mother as you've had to navigate the boundaries of wanting to be successful in the creativity that you desire as an author and speaker, using the platform to share your story, to share the Lord, but also creating those boundaries of being intentional as a mom, and how, you know, both can be very time consuming. So what has that looked like of how you've, I understand you've said no and had seasons and boundaries with the timing on weekends and things like that. But have there been other lessons that you've learned that, you know, we as moms, we don't want to just, you know, one of the things I get really frustrated about is when moms just say, I'm just a mom, as if it doesn't, like, it's the greatest gift on earth to be a mom. Right. And so, you know, we want to be intentional as a mom, but it doesn't mean that we're not allowed to be creative. So how have you navigated the marriage of that?
Yes. And, you know, my kids do attend school, so we don't homeschool. So once they were going to school, then it was while they were away, that's when I would do my writing, podcasting, article writing, whatever it is, right? And then when I go out to speak, whether it's on a weeknight or a weekend, my husband is a realtor, so he has a flexible schedule. And then if he wasn't able to, my mom and dad live 5 minutes away. So we are in a very ideal situation where the kids could always be with us, and it was not really that big of a deal that way. Now, when the kids were younger, you know, like 2, 3, 4, etc. So this is the beauty, truly, you know, my book is Screen Kids, but the beauty of, if you don't put your kids on screens too early, they really do have an amazing, lovely ability to play and entertain themselves.
Right.
So I would have my kids in the same room with me, and they're playing with blocks, or they're coloring, or they're setting up a store, or whatever they're doing. And I would just be writing. Like in one of my books, Parents Rising, I write the story about how Lucy, my youngest, used to comb my hair and braid it while I would be writing an article or something. So there are things. So basically in those early years, it was, hey kids, mommy's got to write for an hour. You guys go find something to do. And it's really lovely. Like it's good, because it's also good for the kids to realize, okay, my mother isn't like this, or like doesn't circle around me my whole life trying to please me and amuse me. Like sometimes I got to take care of myself. And if you can do that screen free, then all the better for your child. And obviously the earlier your child is younger, the better that's going to work. You know, here we are now in the pandemic, and so everyone's home. So here we are, you and I are talking, and my 2 kids are in distance learning high school. So they're on their computers right now in class. But then my youngest, she's in this room sometimes, and she knows, and she's doing latch hook, she's working on a project, she might be reading a book. And so I think if we can teach our kids to work alongside of us in our environment, and obviously when this interview is over, then we can be a little bit more noisy, but they know, like, just like if you're a mom and you've got, like, I've got to go on my Zoom call, for your kids to learn, hey, you've got to be quiet for half an hour because mommy's in this meeting. Like, that's a really good skill for a child to learn how to discipline themselves, to work as a team, to be part of the solution, you know, all those things. And I know if you're like rolling your eyes, like, what planet are you from? Then you can look at Parents Rising, that book, because that's just about training your kids and how it's possible. So all that to say, so I try to, you know, work within the time allotted, and then it does make you more focused, because you realize, like, I can't waste this time. So I still am a list maker on paper. Like on paper, I will write down, send off the 20 devotions, make these promos, record podcasts. I still do it on paper and it's on my electronic calendar as well, but it just helps me the night before. I'll write down what I need to do the next day and get those things done. And basically for me, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, let's say till 2, with breaks in between as the kids are on breaks from school. And then after 2, it's kind of over because the kids are starting to stop being on school. So it's looking at those hours of your day and seeing how can I kind of squeeze the most out of them, and being as streamlined as you can in that time. And then involve your kids in your work. So one way to make it fun that mommy was a speaker and an author was that whenever there was a really cool trip, I would take one of the kids. So when Ethan was 10, we went to New York City, and that was like amazing. It was awesome. And so then Noelle, my next, we'd pray. We prayed for 1 year because she wanted to go to New York City too. And so I said, well, you just got to pray that mommy gets a job in New York City. And once I have a project in New York City, you will come. And she prayed honestly for a year. And we went 2 summers ago to New York City. I spoke at a conference in New Jersey, and it was amazing. And so she prayed, and that happened. And actually, my third daughter, then we were going to go to New York City together this year, but that was canceled because of coronavirus. So that is still to come. But all that to say that involving them in the trips, and they are at the book table, they sell my books for me. They're my best spokespeople, because now the person has seen like, oh, look, they can look you in the eye, and they can ring you up, and like, oh, this is actually working. This whole actually working. So all that to say, involve your kids in your work as you can. And that's a really good plus too.
That's so good. I've enjoyed having my 3 daughters with all the conference planning, and it's a gift, and it's something that they love and value, and get to be a part of. They're proud to be a part of it. So tell me, you mentioned your new book, Screen Time?
Screen Kids.
Screen Kids.
Yeah.
Okay. You have 2 that are coming out.
Yes. So the 2 that are coming out they're Screen Kids, and that's for you parents out there who are like, what are screens doing to my child's brain? What about the emotional health of my child? What are the like real world skills that my child might be missing because they're on screen so much? How does this affect their spirit? All those things. So that's Screen Kids, latest research. And then a companion book is Grandparenting Screen Kids, because we feel like that grandparenting segment is underserved with technology, because they're like, okay, we have to watch our grandkids right now, and they're on the iPad all the time, and we do not know what to do with them, So this is a book for grandparents to kind of help them navigate having grandkids with screens, and what are things they need to know, what are things that they can do to make it a more positive experience when they're all together.
That is so needed. I mean, I think just being able to link the grandparents with the generation that is consumed with technology, being able to link those two, I think is brilliant. Tell us a little bit about what we can, or give us a little sneak peek into the book that's coming out. We know that technology can be used for good, but we also know that there are a lot of negative things that, especially the younger our children are, that it's not good, it's not healthy. You talked a minute ago about, which I believe very strongly in, that we should not set our kids up for failure by always entertaining them or setting them in front of a screen, but we should teach them how to entertain themselves. We should teach them, God gave them a brain, and be able to be creative. And so I think, especially then also given in the pandemic, it's easy for parents to want to resort to technology and screens being the go-to babysitter. And you and I know that that's not the right answer and not in their best interest. How would you encourage the parents who feel like they're just trying to survive? Now schools are online, so you're having forced technology. how can we kind of transition, especially in this time of creating those boundaries that we believe are healthy for our children, while also living in the world that we live in?
I think we have to start with that why, like having that strong why, because it is super convenient. And of course, we don't want this to sound condemning or judging. Like, we don't want you to feel guilty because maybe you are a single mom trying to figure all this out and you're thinking, how in the world am I
Right.
going to do this with these crazy kids running around if I don't use technology? So I don't want you to feel bad about this, but what I do want you to do is just kind of assess, like, where are we and what can you do, and get that why in place. So for instance, and one comparison we make in the book is when I moved into our house many, many years ago, it was in new construction and it was just dirt. And you had to wonder, like, why are we buying a house here? But eventually, of course, the roads went into Walmart and all these different places, right? And your child's brain, you have to realize, is just like dirt. It's, the pathways are not built. It's just
Right.
dirt. And if the only pathway that is being built and strengthened is the pathway to TikTok and the pathway to YouTube and the pathway to movies, then when your child grows up and has to find a mate or interview for a job or work in customer service or just attend church and worship God or read the Bible, which is a complicated book to read,
Right.
then there's no pathway. It's like there's never been a road built there. And can you imagine if I came and lived in my house, but the only place I could ever go was Walmart? You know, I'd be like, I've been cheated. There's like a million other places in the world to see, but all I do, you know, no slam on Walmart, you understand.
Right. Right. Right.
So for kids, if we realize that as a parent, like, wait a minute, my child needs a pathway that knows how to ride a bicycle, that knows how to play with friends outside, that knows how to have conflict with kids. Because, you know, when you're online and entertained, there's no conflict. You just get to do
Right.
whatever you want.
Right.
But when you're playing outside with your friends or you're talking to your friends, you have to read their body language, and you have to be able to say, like, oh, my friend is sad today. Why is my friend sad today? I mean, you're learning so many things that you cannot learn if you're just on Netflix for 5 hours a day.
Sure.
So that, I think, is a huge, if you can just get that why in place, and a little bit of fear, some healthy fear. We as parents, we're so safety conscious. I mean, we're kind of crazy. And
Right.
we talk about this in the book Screen Kids also, if you were boarding an airplane and they said, oh, you know, 60% of people, and I might be getting that percentage wrong, maybe it was more like 40%, 40% of people, when they enter this airplane, they're going to, you know, feel dizzy. They're going to get headaches. They're going to be susceptible to disease, susceptible to obesity. You'd be like, I'm not getting on that plane. 4 in 10 chances, you know, and yet those are the kind of numbers of kids that will be adversely affected by screen time through
Right.
obesity, through ADHD, through all sorts of things. So anyways, all that to say, I think a healthy fear is good. It's okay.
Right.
Like, if you're a little scared, you should be a little scared, because
Right.
they
Right.
are doing brain scans that show that their brains look, you know, let's say they're playing, you know, 10 hours of video games a week.
Mm-hmm.
Look at a brain scan and look at a cocaine addict, and the same parts of the brain for
Right.
addiction are lighting up, you know, things like that. So all that to say, get that why in place. Like, I want my child to have the roads built, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want my child to be addicted to any screen. Why send your child out with that kind of disadvantage in life? So now you've got the why.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, okay, it's recommended, you know, no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time.
Mm-hmm.
So if your kids are already, you know, and that's by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and also by this long study that they're making of 10,000 plus kids. So if you know, okay, they're already on screen so long. Now, school is not recreational screen time. I get that. It's kind of boring and hard, honestly, to look at a teacher for a long time. But once they're off, now if they're going into 3-4 hours of gaming, of TV, you have to go like, hey, that's not good. And so then that's you putting in those rules. And the last thing I want to share is a good way to look at it is digital vegetables and digital candy. So just like your kid could not sit and eat Oreos all day and Snickers bars all day, you know, like that would be that's very obvious to us, that if you sat down at dinner and had a Snickers bar, and then you sat down at lunch and had a bag of Cheetos, and then for breakfast, if you had soda and a piece of pizza, like, you'd know, like, man, you're headed for trouble. So it's the same thing if your child digitally is having all this candy, YouTube, whatever. Because yes, it can be a vegetable. School is a vegetable. Your kid does not wake up and say, oh, I can't wait to listen to my teacher on Zoom. You know, they don't go at dinner after dinner. Oh, I wish there were more Zoom calls with my teacher, you know. So that's a digital vegetable. It's something that's made to strengthen their life. Talking to grandma, digital vegetable. Learning a Bible verse online, digital vegetable. Learning a different language online, digital vegetable. You know the difference as you, so start categorizing things in that way. So if your child wants to do a digital vegetable, you're like, okay, that makes sense. That's going to be good for you. But if it's digital candy that you go, okay, that maybe 1 hour a day of the candy is enough, or else you're going to have candy all day. You're going to have a stomach ache. That's not going to work good for them. And even teach them at a young age that language, you know, and a digital vegetable could be a movie watched together as a family.
Right.
Because watching together is very different than watching alone.
Right. I love that analogy, because I think so often we, you know, go to extremes of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Of just assuming that all technology is bad, and technology is not bad. I mean, especially in the pandemic we're in, it's a gift that we have technology. So I think that it's not all bad, but I love the vegetable dessert analogy of being able to distinguish what's good, what's healthy, what's helping you grow versus what's stifling your growth. I love that. What was the motivation? I know we're almost out of time, but what was the motivation for this book being written? Obviously, you have children in the age bracket that is inundated with technology, and we live in a world that's being consumed by it. But was there a particular motivation? And did you write this one also with Dr. Gary Chapman?
Yeah, so these are books written with Dr. Gary Chapman, and they are revisions of a 2014 book that we wrote together called Growing Up Social. So this is a revised and updated version with new statistics, etc. And really the motivation came with a lot of the problems I was hearing about, so much heartache about like, oh, my child's on Fortnite all the time, or my child is on video games, or we're losing our child, or we don't have a relationship with our child, or they're depressed with social media. To be honest with you, it's like we were not having those problems as a family, our family, because we decided to do that whole childhood thing. And I mean, from birth to elementary school, without a personal phone, without video games in the home, you know, et cetera. And it was like such a beautiful, lovely result. So we really wanted to encourage people that there are different ways. And it just makes us so sad that when we see that parents are in all these situations, and you can't judge because you don't know. If you see someone at dinner, maybe they've just spent 5 hours talking to each other, and this is their first time to check in their email. So you don't know. But when you're the family member and you know, we've all been looking at screens all day and we barely connect. That's like when they're young, your kids, they want to spend time with you. And when you waste that time because you're on technology and they're on technology, I think that's one of the biggest, saddest problems we have in the family today. And that's really why these books were born.
Right. And and what a gift and opportunity we have to invest in our children, and just knowing that they'll be with us, but then just to recognize that, you know, we don't want to waste these moments, to be able to spend time with them, because those 18 years do go by so fast. And so wanting to be able to use our time intentionally and wisely.
You want like the word of God to be impressed on their heart.
Absolutely.
What you've said to be impressed on their hearts, your love impressed on their heart, not like an Apple symbol. So we got to work on that.
Right. Well, just to wrap up, I know that one of the challenging challenges that moms face is they can hear something like this and the immediate response is, it's too late. I failed, you know, and their children, whether they're 2 or 12, they're already consumed with technology. You and I know it's never too late. God's grace and mercy is new every morning. God's grace is sufficient. But it does mean that we have to make choices, and we do have to make changes. So just to encourage us as we begin to wrap up, what would you say to the mom that recognizes there is a problem with boundaries, what's one or two ways that we can begin to pivot and make those changes successfully?
Yeah. So have maybe 24 hours, the next 24 hours, where you just say, God, open my eyes and show me what to do. And then just think of, okay, maybe what's the one thing that's bothering you so much, that's like so awful. So let's say it's that we don't have dinner anymore together. And if we do, we have phones out or we're watching TV. So just get a specific thing in your mind. Then you would say, okay, that's what we're going to tackle. We're going to do a phone-free dinner for everybody, sometimes as a parents, right? And then that's what we're going to tackle. So just ask God for help. And then specifically think, what's a real point of tension? Maybe it's that you need to collect your daughter's phone overnight or your son's phone overnight. Maybe it's that you need to say video games are not allowed after 11 p.m. and you need to change your Wi-Fi password. So think like, what do you need to do? And then really do something that's measurable and that a week from now, you'll know if you did it or not. So it can't just be like we'll do it less, because you're not going to do anything. But specific, like we're changing the Wi-Fi password and we're turning off the modem and we're locking it down until from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., or whatever. So basically what I'm saying is assess it, have an action step, and really do it. Because if you just have a good intention and a good thought, it doesn't matter. It's so sad, but it doesn't matter. So you have to do something. And it may begin with an apology to your child. Hey, you know what? I just realized that we've really let this go and I really want you to grow up healthier. So here's something I'm going to try to do to remedy it. So approach your child apologetically, because it is on us, extreme ownership, right? Jocko, the book. So, it's on us, but also have, be like a tree that even if they're not going to be like, oh, Mom, you're being so mature. Good job. They're going to be like, what? This is crazy. My friends are going to be so mad, blah, blah, blah. Then you have to just be like, sorry. Then you're kind of like a stone and you're like, sorry, that's the way it's going to go.
Right. Oh, Arlene, I've learned and gleaned so much from you. And I know that our audience, there's so many nuggets of truth. And I love hearing your journey of just how God orchestrated your story and your path onto being an author and a speaker, and now writing about things that are relevant for all of us, and making a difference in the world, and just how God's the beautiful storyteller. And I love the story that he's writing in your life and how he's been able to use your platform for his glory. Do you have any final words for us that you want to close with?
Sure. Just to have that idea, like it is not too late. As long as you are in your house and your kids are there too, it is not too late for you to start mending some fences, for you to start kind of being like, I'm going to be the tough mom. And if you get that, you're so mean, Mom, then like, hey, I'm doing something right. I'm doing something right. And the Lord will give you that wisdom and grace to move forward.
So good. Well, Arlene, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our audience members. And we look forward to the book. Tell us again where we can get it and
yes,
when it comes out.
The book is Scream Kids and Grandparenting Scream Kids. It comes out on October 6th. And you can look at screenkidsbook.com or my website, arlenepellicane.com. And of course, you can buy it on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Scream Kids.
Sounds good. Well, Arlene, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to reading your book and gleaning more nuggets of truth.